Pastor Ed here with Daily Devotions for Thursday, December the 26th, 2024, the day after Christmas. Hope you had a wonderful day yesterday. Again, I am reading some selections from Martin Luther's daily readings entitled Day by Day We Magnify Thee. It was different selections were taken from some sermons and things that he wrote. This is one that was, all of these were for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day and the days immediately following. The gospel passage that he refers to here is John 1, 1 to 14, focusing on that last verse where the Gospel of John says, the Word was made flesh and, of course, dwelt among us. And so in John's Gospel, Jesus is the divine Word. Jesus is at the beginning with God. Jesus was God, the Word. But the Word then entered into our existence, became flesh, and dwelt among us. And so this is what Luther wrote on Christmas Day in 1522. He says, Christ has a holy birth, immaculate and pure. Man's birth is unclean, sinful, accursed, and man can only be helped through the holy birth of Christ. Yet Christ's birth cannot be shared out to us, nor would it help, but it is offered spiritually unto every man, wherever the word is preached. He who firmly believes and receives it will not suffer harm because of his own sinful birth. I neglected to mention this yesterday. Luther, reflecting the times, I guess, talks only in the male term of he. Obviously, we would change that, correct that to, men and women, he and she, but we're reading here exactly the way Luther wrote it. But in our minds, our sensibilities, of course, it's all people that we're thinking about. Luther goes on to say this, that is the way we are cleansed of our wretched Adam's birth, and that is why it was Christ's will and pleasure to be born as man, so that in him we might be born again. Of his own will he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we should be reborn into a new creation. Behold, in this manner Christ takes our birth away from us and sinks it in his own birth, and gives us his birth, that we may be made new and clean as if it were our own birth. And therefore shall every Christian man rejoice in this birth of Christ and glory in it, as if he too were born of Mary. He who does not believe that or doubts it is no Christian. Oh, this is the great joy of which the angel speaks. This is God's comfort in his surpassing goodness, that man, if he believeth, may glory in such a treasure, that Mary be his very mother, Christ his brother, God his Father. For all these things have truly happened, that we might believe in them. See then, that thou make this birth thine own, and dost change with him, so that thou mayest be rid of thy birth, and mayest take over his, which comes to pass if thou believest. Thus dost thou surely sit in the Virgin Mary's lap, and art her darling child. But thou must learn to have such faith, and to exercise it throughout thine earthly life, for it can never be strong enough. Of course, Luther talks in terms and in ways that are probably a little more difficult for us to understand, but the whole point here is that in order to be our Savior, and that's where John's Gospel is coming from, he had to become one of us. The Word, became flesh and dwelt among us. And Luther hints at here something that he talks about frequently of a great exchange, that, Jesus takes on our nature, our sinfulness, our finitude, and in this great exchange, he gives us his righteousness. So we are not righteous or sinless on our own, but we receive the gift of righteousness from Christ, who takes on our sinfulness, this great exchange, this wonderful way in which God chose to come to us in a way that we could understand. Soren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher and theologian, often talked about this, others as well, that, how could we understand a God who is beyond our comprehension? Um, Only if that God comes to us as one of us. And so it was Kierkegaard, I think it was, who told the story about a prince who was traveling through his kingdom. He sees a beautiful maiden. Um, he falls in love with her. He wants to make her his queen, but he's afraid that if he comes to her as the king, she's going to respond as any subject will, to feel compelled uh, to respond to him, to perhaps even love him, but maybe she won't even know how to love him. She just feels obligated. And so, according to the story, what does the king do? He returns to the castle, but he comes back dressed as a regular person. He lives among um, the villagers as a regular person. He gets to know the young woman. She gets to know him, not as her king. She has no idea at this point who he is. She falls in love with the man who's in her midst, the man who she's come to know. And so Kierkegaard uses that to describe how God has come to us in a form that we could understand. And it's also in the sense of the Christmas story that God not only comes in human form, but God comes as a child, a baby, a vulnerable, weak child, um, just to show us how much he wants to be with us and how much he wants us to get to know him. This wonderful moment in which, again, as John puts it, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Well, I hope you continue to have a great time celebrating this Christmas season. And we'll continue with Luther again tomorrow. Until then, take care. Bye.